All right, everybody, welcome into the Alley-Oop. I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. This is the very first divisional check-in during the middle of the season. Very first one, and we've got the Atlantic Division, which just had the James Harden trade in it, so I was able to talk to Bryan Toporek about that. Able to talk to Erik Slater about the Brooklyn Nets, Dan Greenburg about the Boston Celtics, Esfandiar Baraheni about the Toronto Raptors, and Dan Favale about the New York Knicks. Was a great mix of conversations. We talked about the in-season tournament a little bit. It's going to be fantastic. Please, please, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and share out the podcast if you possibly can. It is awesome, and I really do believe that this is a great thing for NBA coverage. Nobody else is doing anything like this, and I think that this will be great for all NBA audiences. So hit that like, share it out, rate 5 stars, do all that jazz. That would be tremendous. It would be extremely, extremely helpful. Without further ado, here is the Alley-Oop.
Run, 2-on-1, Green the finish. Wow, the alley-oop. Turn the corner, inside! He made Yusuf Nurkic's screensaver. Here comes Murray, alley-oop to Gordon. Oh, what a play!
Joined now by Bryan Toporek of Forbes and Liberty Ballers. He also is the host of the NBA pod. Thank you so much for hopping on. This is a very crazy time for Philly and Philly writers and anybody that is associated with James Harden in any way. I'm glad you're done with it. I'm honestly glad you're done.
You and me both. Thank you for having me. I honestly did not expect to be able to talk about what we're about to talk about this early in the season, but I am very, very relieved that that is the case.
I thought that Daryl Morey would be in it for the long haul, just like you. I thought that he would take this all the way down to the nub, and the Clippers would absolutely be waiting too, but sounds like they were the first to break, and he was also very excited to get what he got, and that, I think, makes this, at least in theory, a win-win for both sides until the Clippers actually have to play in the playoffs. But we'll see what happens. We'll see. Philly, let's start with the game that we just watched, actually, and then go to the Harden trade after that. We're recording this immediately after the Sixers beat Toronto. It was very convincing. There were a lot of good layers to it. What's your initial takeaway for this game?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd say there's probably 3 big ones. One, Joel Embiid's passing to start the year has been sensational. He was leading the team with 7 assists per game in each of the first 3 games of the season. He added 7 assists tonight to go with 28 points, 13 rebounds. You know, under Nick Nurse, we're just seeing a lot more both ball and player movement than we saw under Doc Rivers, whose entire offense was basically just predicated on spamming the Harden Embiid pick and roll. So Embiid is actually taking advantage of this. And, you know, he said dating back to training camp, like, this is the way he's wanted to play. I remember even last year, you know, he like offhandedly said, you know, I could play like Nikola Jokic if I wanted to. And everyone thought he was joking. I'm not saying he's on the like caliber of passer as Jokic. Obviously, Jokic is, you know, on a tier of his own, especially as a big man. But we're seeing more of this playmaking gene from Embiid, which has really made the Sixers offense much more dynamic. Tobias Harris has gotten off to a great start this season, 23 points on 10 of 17 shooting, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals against Toronto tonight, continuing a hot start to the season for him. And Kelly Oubre Jr., man, you know, he signs in mid-September on a 1-year vet min deal. You know, everyone thought like, oh, okay, the guy averaged 20 points per game last year, but on a terrible Hornets team, you know, can he actually contribute to winning basketball? He's been really good. Like one of the free agent steals of the summer so far for the Sixers. He started tonight as there's still, you know, Nick Batum, Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, KJ Martin did not play, or I guess they played at the very end of the game, but they're still ramping up, getting used to this new system. So we'll see if he maintains that long-term spot in the starting lineup. Nick Nurse has said he kind of likes the spark that Oubre provides off the bench, but whether he's a starter, whether he's coming off the bench, he's been honestly something the Sixers haven't had in a long, long time.
He's been dynamic, and that's probably the thing that when you talk about what the Sixers were going to be without James Harden, Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid were guys that you consider dynamic, but I don't think you'd consider Tobias Harris dynamic. I don't think you'd consider DeAnthony Melton, although maybe he has some moments, but Patrick Beverley, Paul Reed is good, but he's not quite that level in terms of like, hey, you could come in and really put up 25 and also lock down the opposing team's best wing. There's a lot to like with what Kelly Oubre has provided, and we obviously talked about Tyrese Maxey in the outset. Like, he rules, and it just seems like the team is playing with a little bit more freedom, with a little bit more energy, with a little bit more want to, and those all come from, I mean, well, I'm not going to speak for you. It sounds like comes without Doc Rivers and James Harden on the roster, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, the leash has been taken off, as James Harden might say. But I think it's a huge testament to Nick Nurse and a testament to the Sixers for buying into his system so quickly while they had this James Harden drama hanging over them for, training camp, the preseason, and the first couple games of the season. Like, so far, so good for Nick Nurse with the Sixers, which, when they hired him, Raptors fans were like, oh, have fun with that. And then, Sixers fans were like, excuse me, we were coached by Doc Rivers for the last 3 years. I'm pretty sure he's still going to be an upgrade. So
there's levels to this conversation. So.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I will not be surprised if or when he wears out his welcome. But right now we are definitely in the honeymoon phase with him.
Love that. And love a good honeymoon for sure. I think Tom Thibodeau is a great example of how the honeymoon can work initially. And there's a lot to at least like in the first year of this experiment. So, okay, let's get into the Harden trade specifically. Break down for me what the Sixers got, why they did it, and how this kind of affects their title hopes.
For sure. So they got the expiring contracts of Marcus Morris, Nick Batum, Robert Covington, and KJ Martin, or Kenyon Martin Jr. Interchangeable. I don't know why. He's listed as Kenyon Martin Jr. on the NBA.com website. That's what I'm going
everybody has a different way of approaching it. So he's KJ Martin to me.
Yeah, exactly. I know. They got a 2026 first round pick. It is the worst of the Thunder's pick, the Clippers pick, or the Rockets pick, which is top 4 protected. They got the Clippers unprotected 2028 first round pick. They got a top 3 protected pick swap in 2029, and then 2 second-round picks as well. So Daryl Morey, dating back to the summer, went on the radio in a local Philly station and said, look, what we're trying to do here is either get a star player in return for James Harden or get the pieces that will allow us to go get a star player. And not only that, but we want to, be competitive this year, which so far so good on that front. But we also want to maintain our flexibility looking ahead to next season, because right now they're in line to have upward of $50 million, potentially even $60 million of salary cap space, which is a very unique position for a playoff contender or even a title contender to have. It's usually, rebuilding teams are the ones with cap space, and then the contenders have to figure out, okay, we've maybe got a mid-level exception, or we could sign and trade for someone, but it's hard to make that big splash. If the Sixers don't make the big splash by the trade deadline, they're going to the offseason with, hey, we can actually sign, even a guy with 10 plus years of NBA experience. We will have enough cap space to sign him to a max contract if so desired.
And it wouldn't be a bad idea to wait and just, not necessarily punt on this season, but give Maxey as much of a runway to continue improving and continue doing what he needs to do to become the all-star caliber player that he seems to be well on his way to being. It would give them an opportunity to then save those assets, sign somebody at that point, and then use those assets to add even more at the trade deadline of the next year. So they do need to have, or at least like this deal, it gives them at least a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of leeway to pick and choose the direction that they want to go and not make the mistake of jumping the gun too soon. So if I'm Daryl Morey in this situation, this is the first time where I can really say, yeah, you should be patient. Like the other times I was a little bit skeptical on the actual patience level, but now this is where you be patient as long as Embiid says it's okay. He may not say it's okay to be patient.
Yeah. It's funny because Morey actually spoke with reporters Wednesday after the trade went down, and he said he would actually prefer to use the cap space early, which I think would interpret as by the trade deadline. I think you're right. There are pros and cons to each approach. If you wait till free agency and then go after an OG Anunoby or a Pascal Siakam, then, as you said, you're not giving up the draft picks. So, why go to Toronto and offer everything you just got from the Clippers when you can sign these guys 4 months later? The counterpoint to that is to clear all of that cap space, you've got to renounce the rights to either everyone or almost everyone. I'll have an article on Liberty Ballers, I think on Friday, that's going to run through some of these permutations. Like there is a scenario where they could keep the cap holds of Maxey, Melton, and KJ Martin and still have enough to max out OG Anunoby. But after that, you've got, an $8.1 million room exception and then veteran minimum contracts. So
right.
Can you actually round out your roster to have a championship level core beyond, you'll have, again, maybe Maxey, Melton, Martin, whoever the star free agent is, Embiid, you'd still have Paul Reed, you'd still have Jaden Springer. But, is that enough? Or do you make this move now or, by the trade deadline? And then you can keep the cap hold of a Tobias Harris on the books as well and potentially re-sign him and keep the cap hold of the guys that you just got from the Clippers. So it's a really interesting balance for them to strike. And, how the stakes are enormous because you're totally right. If they screw this up, it could be, does Joel Embiid ask out next summer or, at some point in the next 1 to 2 years? So they know they have to get this move right. And I agree, they can't aggregate the contracts that they got from the Clippers until January 1st. So for the next 2 months, we will get to see Tyrese Maxey in this expanded role. We'll get to see if Joel Embiid can keep up this level of playmaking, if Tobias Harris can maintain this level of aggression, if Kelly Oubre Jr. can, maintain his hot start to the season. DeAnthony Melton has not been great offensively. Can he get going? Can Paul Reed get going? They have a lot of questions to answer with the guys currently on the roster. But, Morey and Elton Brand and the rest of the front office also have to start looking around the league at which teams might be blowing it up and how much is it going to cost? And, what's the right move? Is it right to do this now or should we wait until the summer? Again, there are pros and cons to each approach. And I think it sets up a very fascinating, anywhere from 3 to 8 months for the Sixers.
We'll have plenty of time to discuss other trade targets. Hopefully this hasn't happened in between now and then for our next check-in in about 6 weeks or so. But I want to focus in, final thing here, on the in-season tournament. Sixers are in a group right now with Detroit, Indiana, Atlanta, and Cleveland. Curious as to just your overall takeaways from the in-season tournament push that the league has put out this year, and do you have any takes?
Yeah, I don't get why so many people are against it. There's no downside, right? Especially these group play games are just regular season games with a different court and different jerseys. But other than that, it's the same game that you're going to tune into anyway. And then once we get into the knockout bracket, I don't know, it could be really cool. This might be our only taste of actual playoff style basketball until April or until later in the season. And, sometimes we see these regular season games, even, Clippers Lakers last night was really fun and had playoff caliber intensity. And when these happen, we're all like, oh man, I wish we could see this more often. Who's to say that once we get into the semifinals or the finals of the in-season tournament and $500,000 is on the line for each player, which, for the superstars in the league, that is chump change. But for a guy on a minimum deal or a guy on a rookie contract, that might be a fourth of your paycheck this year. You're going to actually want to win this for your teammates. So I'm not saying it's going to be the best thing ever, but I'm on board with it. I just don't see the downside to it. And I don't get why people are so up in arms about how dare they ruin the sanctity of the regular season when all of us have been saying for the last few years the regular season doesn't really matter.
Yeah, there's been I firmly agree with you, and I've had this conversation with some other folks too. This is going to be fun, and I think a lot of people are going to be very pleasantly surprised by it. It's just because it's new. It's just because people haven't experienced it before. The play-in got some like general queasiness from a lot of the fan base, and then who'd have thunk it? It turned out to be awesome, and like there's plenty of reasons for people to be tuning in at that point. So this should be interesting. Not necessarily a fan of the courts and all the distinguishing jerseys. Like Denver's jersey was just despicable. But I mean, we'll have to play that by ear and see what happens. But I'm looking forward to it. It should be a lot of fun. Any final takeaways before we get out of here?
No, I mean, we'll see. I know Cleveland, especially as in Philly's group, has been kind of injury ravaged to start the year with Darius Garland and Jared Allen. So hopefully those guys can get back in the next few weeks, and we see a full strength Cleveland team in that bracket. Because otherwise, I mean, if they can't, that group feels like Philly's to lose. I know Atlanta's pulled out of the early season slow start. With all due respect to Detroit, I don't think they're a real threat. And Indiana is fun and frisky, and I'm actually very excited to see how they match up against this swarming Sixers defense. But I'm excited for it. I'm on board. And, honestly, I'm just psyched that every time we get to talk about the Sixers this year, I don't have to talk about James Harden anymore.
Hey, man, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and in both ways, for sure. So
it really is.
Should be fun. I think the Sixers are a good bet to win this thing. So should be fascinating to see. But he is Bryan Toporek of Forbes Sports, Liberty Ballers, and host of the NBA Pod. Bryan, thank you so much for taking the time. I look forward to chatting with you in 6 weeks or so.
Yes, sir. Thanks as always, Ryan.
Joining me now is Esfandiar Baraheni of SDPN Sports. Esfandiar, thank you so much for hopping on. We're doing this immediately post-game after the Toronto Raptors loss to the Philadelphia 76ers. Kind of a tough one, kind of a little bit of the same. What can you kind of give me for takeaways for maybe this game and the first 6 games of the year?
Yeah, I think the half-court offense struggled again immensely in this one. To be honest with you, I thought the Raptors actually had a pretty decent game plan coming into this one, but ultimately, I come away more impressed with Philly than disappointed in Toronto. I thought Philly's defense was excellent. They packed the paint against the Raptors. Joel Embiid was phenomenal as a rim protector, just kind of deterring anything going down in the paint. I mean, Pascal Siakam had 10 points on 11 shots. They did an incredible job of him. Maybe, Nick Nurse had the scouting report out on Pascal already, but ultimately I come away more impressed by the Sixers than sort of disappointed where the Raptors are at with this game specifically. But, overarching idea of the first 6 games for the Raptors is that this team is going to struggle immensely in the half court. They just don't have the personnel to be good on that end, and they're going to have to hang their hat on their defense, getting out in transition and scoring buckets that way. They weren't able to do that too much tonight. And, when they don't have that source of offense for them, they are going to struggle immensely. Even if they scored 20 fast break points tonight, it still wasn't enough because Philly scored 27 and they dominated on the interior. So it's kind of, when they lose, it's similar and it looks the exact same. And when they win, it sort of looks miraculous. But that's how this Raptors season is probably going to go.
Yeah, so there was a possession late in this game. I didn't watch the full thing, full transparency. I had to cook dinner tonight. But the NBA TV announcer had a good call, a very accurate call late in the fourth quarter. There was a possession where Toronto worked the ball around the perimeter, threw the ball into the inside. Nobody was willing to shoot. There were several open shots that were there for the taking. But he said, quote, "Somebody's got to shoot the ball." And it turned into a turnover, a fast break dunk, timeout by the Raptors, basically the backbreaker to end the game. Yeah. And I feel like that's pretty emblematic at this point of you need somebody to shoot the ball. You need somebody in the lineup that is willing to take those shots, even if they're not going to be perfect. And for all the questions about Fred VanVleet and whether he was going to be able to, like, whether he was the right guy to kind of bring back, he would have taken those shots. And there's I think, a void there that the Raptors are currently struggling to fill.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, they generated, what were the final numbers here for their half court offense? I think it's probably in the 80s in terms of points per 100 possessions, maybe 75s. They've only cracked 100 points per 100 possessions in one game, and that was in their Milwaukee game. Yeah, they put 81.2 points per 100 possessions.
It's just not good enough, man. It's just not.
It's not only not good enough, it would be a historically bad half court offense. I mean, the Rockets last year were 90.5 points per 100 possessions, and they were dead last. And if you're consistently putting up 81 and 72 and 75 points per 100 possessions in the half court, you're just not generating enough good looks. There are tons of issues for that. You know, the spacing is a big problem for the Toronto Raptors. I think ultimately guys who can create an advantage in the half court is also an issue for the Raptors. They don't have anybody who can create separation in any meaningful way. And it's just going to be like this for a very long time until they shake things up with this roster, whether it be with OG or Pascal or whoever. The one silver lining, Ryan, the one silver lining with all of this, through the 6 games, through everything that we've watched, is that Scottie Barnes has been absolutely phenomenal. Like, just genuinely, he looks like he is taking that quote-unquote star leap. He's averaging over 20 points, 10 rebounds, 1 steal, 2 blocks, all that stuff. He had, I believe, 24, 8, and 8 tonight. He's been sensational. Genuinely sensational in every step of the way. He's improved as a shooter. He's getting better as a mid-range scorer as well. And I ultimately think, like, regardless of how this season goes, results-wise, process-wise, it will be really good for Scottie Barnes in the future.
Yeah, Scottie Barnes has been tremendous, and it has been very nice to see him continue to progress. And it was one of the questions heading into this year: is he going to be the building block that Toronto, I think, had kept out of these deals over the summer? We've talked about that before. And it's nice to know that even if the rest of the roster isn't well suited for his needs right now, that there's still plenty of time, there's still plenty of resources to be able to build this out in the long term. It's just an unfortunate thing in game 6 of the season where you start to really see, some of these issues, they may not be solved immediately. And it may be really difficult this season in particular to surround him with the right talent and the right fit that he needs.
Yeah, I think they kind of have prioritized style versus personnel. With Darko Rajakovic, they're trying to implement a style that suits Scottie Barnes very well. These high post elbow actions that they're running, a la Sabonis, a la Bam Adebayo. These are kind of the certain types of situations that you think Scottie Barnes' playmaking can be maximized in, and his scoring has been maximized with these situations as well. I think you're right. They've kind of, I don't know if they've jumped the gun, but I think they've gotten a coach who is looking at the long term when it comes to Scottie Barnes. And I think this is going to be something that they work through the next couple of seasons, whatever the future of this roster looks like. But so far, the return, and you mentioned, they've kept Scottie Barnes out of these deals. I'm not going to go ahead and say he's Kevin Durant. I'm not going to go ahead and say he's Damian Lillard or Giannis, whoever, right? But ultimately, he looks like he's going to be a very good player, probably an all-star at some point in his career. And maybe even soon. And it's just like, hey, when you have that type of player, you can build around that. It instills confidence in the long-term plans of what the Raptors are building.
And I have no doubt that they have plenty of avenues that they can do what they need to do in order to surround him in the right way. In the meantime, in these next few games and then kind of leading into this in-season tournament here, what are you thinking when it comes to finding the best fit right now? Are they just going to stay the course and use the same starting group in all likelihood, or is it possible that we see a change here at some point?
I think Darko Rajakovic is a big fan of Dennis Schroeder's, so I would be very surprised if they switch it up. This team probably does need a little bit of a shakeup in the starting lineup. I've always said that they need to add more shooting to the starters, and while Schroeder has been awesome, like he really, he signed for the mid-level exception. He's punching above his weight in terms of dollar contributed. You know what I mean? He's been awesome to start this year. I mean, he's shooting 50% from three. Like, it's just been incredible to see. That probably won't stick, but he's been their leader, their playmaker, all of that stuff. And I think for what you signed him for, he's been awesome. But ultimately, you need more spacing. You need more shooting. And I think the Raptors bench specifically needs a guy who can kind of get them going a little bit. And, you know, guys like Grady Dick, guys like Gary Trent Jr., guys like Malachi Flynn, they need that, you know, veteran point guard that can lead this second unit. Their bench unit is one of the worst in the league, and that's what's helped them bleed points throughout these 6 games. We saw it tonight in Philadelphia as well, where they just struggled immensely in the second quarter and in the late third quarter. They can't really keep themselves in these games when they are trying to, you know, sustain levels of play with this bench right now. A shakeup makes sense. Do I think it's likely? No, I don't think it's likely. I think Darko likes his guy, and he's going to have him starting the entire season.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. He's like, Schroeder wasn't even the one I was thinking of, just given the expiring situations of Pascal and OG and guys like that. It's I just think the writing is kind of on the wall in where they should be going, but we've got plenty of time to discuss that in future episodes. Mm-hmm. Let's wrap up here with the in-season tournament. Toronto's in a group with Boston, Orlando, Chicago, and Brooklyn. I was just curious, give me one take on the in-season tournament, whether it's from the Raptors perspective or just the NBA in general.
First of all, I love the in-season tournament. I think it's going to be a smashing success. More basketball for me to watch, more basketball for me to cover. Like, I'm a big fan. I don't think there's really any downside to them trying to do this thing. When it comes to the Raptors specifically, they're in a pretty tough group. And all of the games, all of the teams that they have in their group are sort of tough matchups for them. The Nets have this switch-heavy defense. The Bulls and Raptors games always seem to be sluggish. Orlando and Raptors games always seem to be, you know, dogfights. And then Boston has historically been a pretty bad matchup for the Raptors. I don't necessarily love their chances, to be honest with you. I don't love their chances. But ultimately, look, they're going to make every game interesting with their defense. They have shown that they're a very, very good defensive team so far through 6 games. Maybe that gets them to steal a couple. But who knows? I think overall, I'll just say in-season tournament, I like. Raptors' chances, not so much.
Fair enough, and completely understandable. The team that I think of when you talk about Cinderellas is the hot shooting team.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for Toronto, it's just not something I'm really have high expectations for at the moment. So hopefully that changes, and hopefully they can figure it out. But he is Esfandiar Baraheni of SDPN Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to checking in with you in 6 weeks, Ez.
Thank you. I am looking forward to seeing that mustache even thicker in 6 weeks, my guy. Yes, sir. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, joining me now, Dan Greenburg of Barstool Sports, Stool Greeny on X. Make sure to give him a follow over there, although several of you probably are, if we're being honest. Dan, thank you so much for hopping in with me. Boston, they are tremendous to start the season. What's the thing that has really surprised you at the beginning of this year?
It's probably a couple things. The first, the fit is seamless, right? The new guys have integrated like they've been part of this team for a decade already. And obviously when you're joining an established team that has a style that, you know, both of those guys thrive in, then that's expected. But from the on-court stuff, the fact that they now basically are right behind a team like the Nuggets in post-ups has been the biggest change. Tatum has more than, is 5 times more frequent posting up this year than he was last year. He ranks in the 81st percentile. Porzingis ranks in the 95th percentile in post-ups. We just have never seen a version of this era of Celtics basketball that's still taking over 43s a game, but is now one of the, I think they're 3rd in the league in post-ups a game. Like, that is just something I don't think any of us were ready for. And the fact that they're thriving in it is very, very exciting.
Just some numbers for you. 4-0 record, obviously, to start the year. The average margin of victory so far is over 20 points per game. They just beat Indiana by 51. This has been a tremendous start to the year. I'm just going to read off the true shooting percentage for each of the starters so far. Jayson Tatum's at 67. Jaylen Brown's at 57.6. Really struggling there, Jaylen Brown. Excuse me. Sorry, dude. Jrue Holiday, 63.8. Kristaps Porzingis, 72.4. And Derek White, the surprise champion of the group here, 82.0. That is 82% true shooting. He has been dynamic. The post-ups are a thing, but it just does seem like this is the most talented group in the NBA right now. This mix of talent has been fantastic to watch. Are you surprised that it has been as seamless as it's been so far?
It's interesting because last year around this time, we saw the Celtics shoot as a team like 60% from three. Everybody was just automatic. And you knew, as awesome as that was, there was going to be your natural shooting regression. Like you weren't going to shoot 48% from three as a team all year long. What's interesting is this time around, they're shooting 40% from three. And even if that comes down, they just feel better suited to have a counter. Like, okay, whether it's the post, whether it's, the mid-range, they just feel like a team that understood where their deficiencies were last year. I think Sam Cassell has done wonders to sort of train how they're thinking and their approach. And they're just playing smart basketball, right? They're not doing the things that got them in trouble. Like they're respecting their opponents. They're taking these games seriously. They're executing in the clutch. Like those are the things that I think are the pleasant surprise. The fact that they're, off to a great start. I mean, they were 21-5 last season to start the year.
Sure.
So that I think we expected, but how they're doing it, I think is much different.
It is fascinating, and this is why you trade for Jrue Holiday. It's why you trade for Kristaps Porzingis, where even if Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they've obviously started off great so far. No questions asked there. But you also have these layers where a guy like Jrue Holiday can pick his spots. A guy like Kristaps Porzingis picks his spots a little bit better. They get those guys the ball in situations where they can succeed. And then Derek White's just been tremendous. 82% is not going to sustain, but it has been unbelievable to watch this group play together.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, I know last time when we talked about the addition of Porzingis and what that meant, I think a lot of Celtics fans were like, okay, this is going to, unlock something in Jayson Tatum and make his life so much easier and more dynamic. You can't focus on him. But what we're seeing through these first 4 games is the addition of Porzingis may actually be impacting Jaylen Brown more, right? Like we're seeing a version of Jaylen Brown be a much more willing passer. Heading into last night, he was tied with Derek White for the team lead in potential assists. 23 of his 81 passes were going to Porzingis. And I think this is what Brad was probably envisioning. Like, yes, Tatum is obviously going to benefit because now teams can't load up on him. But we are seeing a version of Jaylen Brown that looks more comfortable as a passer. It's giving him much more simpler reads offensively. So now he's not driving into traffic and, being tunnel vision. He's the two-man game between Jaylen and Porzingis is, I think, the root of why they look so different. Like Tatum looks good no matter who you pair him with. But what the Porzingis has been able to do as a rim protector, all that stuff is great. But giving us a new version of Jaylen Brown is what gets this team over the hump.
It is also why you just pay guys. You pay them up front.
Yep.
You just get them the money. You let them figure it out. And then when you surround them with this awesome talent, a guy with a $300 million contract in the bag is probably going to be more willing to pass than he would have been in the other situations. So I think that how they handled everything, despite all the criticism on the outside, despite maybe some iffy feelings from everybody, kind of, you sure you want to give Jaylen Brown that money? Maybe that changes. Maybe that changes over the course of this season, and we have a different feeling. But at least out of the gate, it is off to a tremendous start.
It's just the market. It's the market in the NBA nowadays to keep your best players, right? Like the salary numbers are jarring when you first see them, but This summer, Tatum is going to sign the largest supermax in NBA history. Then next summer, it's going to be Luka that signs the great, so that's just the nature of the beast. But through 4 games, I think he's showing why you pay him, because you didn't have the resources or, assets to replace that type of production. And as it turns out, a second team All NBA guy is pretty good. Like, who would have thought that?
Who would have thought? It seems like a good thing to really go for and push for. Jayson Tatum has been awesome so far. He's still clearly the best player on the team, although other guys have made their impacts known in different ways. Do you think that this is the year that Tatum fully breaks into the MVP conversation? Because he's been kind of on the fringes of it and had a top 5 finish, but hasn't ever really been considered a true candidate so far.
Yeah, I think what was always the case with him is slow starts, strong finishes, right? If you look at someone like Jokic, who I think everyone agrees should just be the MVP from now until the rest of time, every time he steps on the floor, whether it's October, December, May, does not matter. He is that consistent force. This is the first time in Tatum's career. I mean, he's shooting 50-something% from the floor, up to 40% from 3. He's aggressive. He's not playing away from contact. He's playing with more of a purpose, and he's been consistent. I think having that production and consistency from day one is what gets him from maybe fringe top 5 to firmly in the top 3, because you pair the production with the team success, and he's avoiding that October through Thanksgiving where you're like, what the hell is wrong with Jayson Tatum? And then he becomes Jesus Christ in the middle of the season. So the fact that we're getting that version from the jump is, I think, part of what you would expect from a guy who's inching closer to his NBA prime. His body is developing. He has the coaching to bring out new elements in his game. He just looks like a guy that's ready to take that leap.
30 points per game, 9 rebounds, 4 assists. It's obviously early in the year and we'll figure out, but 56% from the field, as you mentioned, has been tremendous to watch him grow.
Yeah, and you were fortunate if in October he was giving you 42, 43% from the floor. So for him to be at 56 is insane.
It's a great, but it's also, hey, he's not 19 anymore like he was the last 5 years. So hey, I think it's more important that you continue seeing that age curve grow. Looking forward, this team over the course of these next few weeks, they've got an upcoming road trip: Brooklyn, Minnesota, Philly. Then they're at home for their first in-season tournament game. Then they go back on the road for a little bit. So it is a relatively tough schedule. But I don't know if there's a team that really is going to challenge this group seriously until they start showing some chinks in the armor.
Yeah, but I think people have to still remember these are the Boston Celtics. They are going to, bring us up and down the emotional roller coaster all year, right? Like, this isn't a new experience for us to see them look this good. I still think if they run into a situation where maybe they're not focused or they just start playing the wrong way, like, you can still get beat in the NBA on any given night. What I think is encouraging is they're validating everything we thought they could be, and it took 2 seconds of the season to see it. That doesn't mean that it'll always be that way. Like, I think, most Celtics fans are a little surprised that the passing numbers are so down. Like, they're 28th in the league in assist percentage, yet they're scoring 150 points a game. So, that is a little... you want to see the ball movement and that, connective tissue, but those are things that you would assume improve over time. But, when they play Philly for the first time, it'll be a battle. When they play Milwaukee, it's going to be a battle. The same way the Knicks and the Heat gave them battles. I just think the difference is now they're not shitting their pants in tight spots and in big moments, or at least they haven't done so up until this point.
They're in a group in the in-season tournament featuring Brooklyn, Toronto, Orlando, Chicago. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how much you or Brooklyn fans or anybody really cares about the in-season tournament. Do you have any takes for me on the in-season tournament so far?
I mean, I'm interested to see it. I think everybody is always, a little negative whenever something new pops in. Like, I don't think it'll have the significance of, oh my God, this is as meaningful as an NBA title for a long time, right? But you see what happens in soccer overseas and how much these smaller tournaments, mean something and people care about. But I'm just interested, A, to see the new courts. I can't believe the NBA is doing full color courts. And B, I just hope, everyone stays healthy. Don't exert yourself to win an in-season tournament. Like, if guys need to rest, so be it. Like, take the fine from Adam Silver. I don't care about that. But, I think a lot of people are assuming the Celtics group is pretty light. But again, any Celtics fan will tell you that any game against the Orlando Magic is not a layup. They, for whatever reason, cannot beat the Orlando Magic. So I'm interested to see it. But, I don't think it's going to be, something like, I certainly hope that, no team is raising a banner for something like this. Like, it's just something cool, during the year, and I'm excited for it. But, to me, I just view it more as a normal regular season game.
Should be interesting. I would probably favor the Celtics right now over pretty much every team in the NBA, but anything can happen in a tournament like this. And it really is just all about, hey, a team gets hot, a team gets cold at the wrong time, and you just never know what's going to happen. So I'm curious to see how they handle it. I'm curious to see how the players really approach it too. So should be very fascinating.
What do they care? They say it's like, oh, the money is the incentive, but like, if you make $30 million a year, what's an extra, like, what is it, $500,000 or something like that?
Yeah.
So
I do think that for like most of these guys, because they're in team, they're on teams, and they're on teams with a bunch of guys that are often only making $1 million or $2 million. Mm-hmm. So this would be a massive incentive for those players. And I think most of these teams, they do play for each other, especially early on in the year. So you're going to try to get that $500K for somebody else on your roster too. But we'll see what happens. I think it is going to be a fascinating dynamic, at least to monitor at the beginning. So
yeah. And
do you have any other?
Everyone hated. You have to remember, everyone. There were people that hated the play-in when that was a new thing, and I'm someone who thinks the play-in has been, an overwhelming success. So, people just don't like change and new things, and we'll probably be talking 2 years from now, talking about how awesome the in-season tournament is, because at the end of the day, like, high-level basketball is still awesome to watch. So, just be open-minded to it.
I agree. Firmly agree. He is Dan Greenburg, everybody. Make sure to go follow his work over at Barstool Sports, covering the Boston Celtics. Dan, thank you so much for hopping on with me. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, Ryan, anytime.
Joining me now, Dan Favale of Bleacher Report, covering our New York Knicks. Thank you so much for hopping on, man. We are recording this right before the Knicks and Bucks play on Friday night, so this YouTube video will come out on Sunday for everybody. But we are recording now here on Thursday just to make sure the audio gets out so that everybody on that side can actually can listen to this. So thank you so much for hopping on, Dan. What's been the most interesting thing about the New York Knicks so far?
I think it's been, to focus on the rosy, the most interesting thing for me has been the play of Mitchell Robinson. Has been absolutely dominant defensively, and is just the stuff that he can do around the basket, where it's not just protecting the rim or swatting shots, it's deterring them. Is that there are a handful of guys right now, I think when you get into the lane, you have players that are maybe triple, like, guessing what they're going to do because they know that guy is there. If you do a short list of 10 to 12, Mitchell Robinson is certainly on that, and I would think fairly high up there right now. And he does force some limitations onto your offense, but the Knicks do a pretty good job of limiting themselves on offense a lot of the time. And so Mitchell Robinson has been a huge part of whatever success they've had. And the final thing, or the two final things with him, is I think he's gotten a lot more disciplined over the past few years, where I know the jokes were he's kind of foul happy. Like, this is not Jaren Jackson Jr. We're talking about. And the other thing is he makes life hell on the glass for just everybody, which is, he is strong, but he's not like, he doesn't look super girthy. Like, he looks strong, but he's not like this super girthy guy who's going to throw you around. Like, this is someone who is, I would say, on the leaner side, but strong, but still really just able to battle on the glass. And every missed shot, whether it's an opponent's or the Knicks' own, it's just a battle for the other team to get the rebound.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't there a game earlier this year where he had 10 offensive rebounds?
Yeah, I if you told me it was 15, 20 offensive rebounds, I would just absolutely believe it. And it's part of the reason I get so frustrated with Josh Hart and Julius Randle a lot this year. But like, Josh Hart is so hesitant to take these threes. And in my head, I'm kind of, and other people have talked about this too, and probably the inspiration for how I'm feeling, it's just shoot that. Like if Josh Hart's 2 of 7 from the 3-point line, how many of those misses you think Mitchell Robinson is getting? 2 or 3 a night if he's on the floor? Throw it up there.
At least one for sure. Like this, he has been impressive, Robinson, especially on the defensive end too. But you alluded to it. There are some definite offensive issues with this group. Starting 2 and 3, played some tough defenses. Don't want to like put the cart before the horse here too much, but they just split a home and home with Cleveland. Julius Randle is currently at this point shooting 28% from the field, and I'm rounding up on that. Why do you think the offense is so stuck in the mud?
I think a big part of it is there's probably just some early season noise in there where Jalen Brunson is shooting like a negative percentage on 2-pointers right now.
Sure.
But when you look at the two things that stand out to me, when you look at Julius Randle specifically, he was moving the ball a bit better to start the year. That last Cleveland game was super concerning from a process standpoint, just looking at what he was doing. They are so much easier to defend when Julius Randle is playing like this. And the every other year jokes are kind of a cliche, but look, we're on track to go through them again where they might be accurate, as well as you think that maybe he's rebounded the ball at points, as well as he's passed the ball at points. When he's not shooting or not shooting well, that's another player that you're just fine helping off of. And then all of a sudden, the other night in Cleveland, you're putting Josh Hart in the starting lineup. That's another guy you can help off of. Mitchell Robinson's already a non-shooter. And so it makes life so difficult on Jalen Brunson, who's had to work. He's shooting really well on off-the-dribble threes this year, but he's kind of had to live out there because he can't get to the rim as often just because the paint is so packed. There are bodies everywhere he's turning. And if you go and look at how hard he needs to work for some of the shots he's getting off, or even where it feels like he's settling or bailing out because he's getting shots off earlier rather than going through the song and dance of like trying to, meander his way and create his way through all this traffic, that's a real problem. And even with RJ Barrett shooting the ball well, even with Emmanuel quickly playing really well, I've been impressed with Donte DiVincenzo's fit from a variant standpoint where he injects some chaos into both ends of the floor, where it's the Knicks are not super inventive with their movement on offense away from the ball. Donte DiVincenzo is going to move around anyway because that's what he does. But even with what I would view as those pluses, there's just not enough room to operate, and they need to figure out a way to open up the floor. And for that to happen with the personnel that they have, it's probably going to come back to Julius Randle.
Just to add some more numbers to that, true shooting percentage by starter so far, Randle's at 37.9, Brunson's at 49, Barrett's at 57.3. Hey, look at RJ Barrett, who's lauded for his shooting efficiency for all time. Mitchell Robinson, 49.7, Quentin Grimes, 47.8. Like, the average true shooting percentage last year was basically where Barrett was. And this team has just been, they have really struggled to space for each other so far. We've talked about the bench. We've talked about how awesome the bench can be. I've liked Isaiah Hartenstein for a long time, Emmanuel Quickly, Josh Hart, Donte DiVincenzo, the aforementioned. But if the starters are going to play this way, then it kind of makes it a moot point, at least a little bit. I know there will be some shooting regression, but what do you think it would take for the Knicks to actually make a starting lineup change? Or is this way too early to talk about that?
It's probably way too early to talk about because I think the only realistic change they could make, or I would say meaningful one, would be, are we going to move away from Julius Randle? Because I just what are you going to do at the 5? You can put in Hartenstein, but like that he can open up the floor a little bit more, but Tibbs wants the traditional rim protector on the court as much as possible. And you're not going to sub out the way Barrett is shooting from 3. And just Quentin Grimes has not had the best start to the year. But knowing what he can do from 3, it might be more of a matter of, hey, is there a way to get Quentin Grimes' volume up? And I think a lot of people, when they talk about that, is we want to see him attack more off the dribble or just get more touches. And it's on this roster, it's can he fire up as many threes as possible? And he's going to get more defensive attention because of how teams are going to help off Randle. I don't know what the starting lineup change would necessarily be. I think a lot of fans would say, like, well, if you could, sub out Julius and maybe you put in Hart, or do you go super small and throw in Quickly or Donte DiVincenzo? It's just not going to happen. I really think if there's going to be a progression to the mean with this roster, it's going to have to come from Julius Randle playing smarter, being a little bit more efficient. And I think the bigger thing is just not hesitating, like not pounding the ball away, when he's beyond the arc. Like take those threes. And get rid of the ball a little bit quicker on certain possessions. Again, I think he's done a better job of some of the passing stuff overall, but even we've seen some really bad turnovers from him as well. And so his entire game, like right from defense, like his closeouts, the times that he's going to switch, it just needs to be better. And I know he's a divisive figure and his value around the league is probably all over the place. He's incredibly, incredibly important to the Knicks. And so as long as he's on this roster, they need him to be no worse than their third best player.
No, for sure. Like that's got to happen. And to your point about whether it was a lineup change to get him out of there and get somebody smaller in there, that's just not a long-term solution either. Like it's definitely something where you're trying to put a Band-Aid over a bullet wound, and that is a problem. And speaking of wounds, like RJ Barrett, we just saw him miss a game with a sore knee. Is there a level of concern there with him missing some time?
There's a level of concern just because it takes a lot for him to miss a game, and just knowing how Tibbs's teams are run, for him to miss a game this soon and when he's been playing as well as he has, there is that mild concern. But I haven't seen anything based on the reporting that would make me think it's more than just general soreness. And so hopefully that isn't something that crops up, because he has been at worst their third best player. If you want to factor in Emmanuel quickly, he's probably been their second best player just based off some of the attention he's commanding when he's putting the ball on the deck. So I think it was almost encouraging against Cleveland to see how much they still kind of needed him, but it was troubling in the sense that, like, okay, Cleveland was missing like two of its top guys still. And so something to monitor. I'm not going to worry just yet because it doesn't seem like the reporting or the way that he was a game time decision, I think, before he got the scratch. And so to go from game time decision to like DEFCON 1 worry would be, that'd be quite the leap.
Yeah, that'd be wild. Hopefully it's nothing too serious with him. Okay, well, so given that we are recording this before Knicks Bucks, on the audio side of things, like folks will hear this before then, but on the video side of things, they won't. The Knicks are in a group now with Milwaukee, Washington, Miami, and Charlotte. Do you have a take on the in-season tournament heading into this thing? What's going to go down?
The in-season tournament things feels like such a Tibbs team tournament, to where it's like they already care about the regular season. And so if you're going to add stakes in the form of being able to win a trophy and get some extra money, I would think that the Knicks are one of the squads that take it more seriously than others. Where you name that group and it's the Wizards are just kind of out there and they might be like one of the most ridiculous teams in NBA history. We know the Heat are just not going to care. Like the Knicks and the Hornets just feel like they're going to care a whole bunch about the in-season tournament. And so I'm all for trying things. I think the NBA misses the mark a lot when it comes to what they do with the All-Star game, but I'm willing to give the in-season tournament a chance. And when you look at it from the Knicks perspective specifically, the way they're coached, the way that they play, even when they're struggling for the most part, I think they'll be one of the more entertaining teams to watch, because I think that they will already ascribe stakes to the outcome, whereas maybe with other teams, other players, other coaches, it might take a few go-rounds for them to warm up to this idea of, oh, the in-season tournament means something.
Could definitely see Tibbs having his starters play 42 in this particular tournament. That will be hilarious. And hopefully it doesn't have any negative ramifications, because I want this thing to be successful for a lot of people and just to introduce another wrinkle of fun into what should be a more fun regular season. But we will see what happens. He is Dan Favale of Bleacher Report, covering the New York Knicks. Dan, thank you so much for hopping on with me, and I'm looking forward to talking to you soon, dude.
No problem. Thanks for having me as always. I'll talk to you soon.
Joined now by Erik Slater. He is covering the Brooklyn Nets for Clutch Points. Thank you so much, Erik, for hopping on with me. You're down in Miami covering Nets Heat, and I really appreciate you taking the time to stop by with me.
Definitely, man. Got to get down here, some sunshine, starting to get cold up in New York. I'm already getting messages about in the 30s there, so I got to squeeze out a little more sunshine and even got a Nets win. So it's been a good week so far.
Good stuff. And against a Miami team that was playing all of their guys for the most part, including Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, like pretty good stuff for the Brooklyn Nets to get a win on the road like that. So 2-2 at this stage. We're recording this on Thursday night, so those that are watching this video are going to wonder, hey, why aren't you covering the back-to-back that just happened? This is the reason why. So we're recording this on Thursday night, but losing close games against Cleveland and Dallas, winning some good games against Charlotte and Miami. Is that kind of the story with this team right now, up and down? What do you think is the story in the early going?
I think the story is honestly that this team could very well be 4-0. And, there's a very real world where they're 4-0 and there's a little bit of buzz and talk about this team right now of how well they're playing. And I think within the Nets community, there still is that buzz and that talk, because those two games that you saw them play against Cleveland and then against Dallas, they were up by 6 with, I think, 1:20 left in that Cleveland game. They had a couple of bad turnovers. Donovan Mitchell hit a couple of tough shots. So very much in that game. But then in the Dallas game, they really played even better in that game, in my opinion, without Nick Claxton and Cam Johnson, two of their starters. And then Luka Doncic just goes ballistic and hits 4 straight threes, the last of which was a hook shot off glass. That is just one of the most ridiculous shots you're ever going to see. So, the Nets could have executed better for sure down the stretch of those games. But if it weren't for 2 very high-level performances from 2 of the league's best scorers, they win those 2 games. Then they go into Charlotte, and Charlotte didn't look good, full disclosure. But the Nets, they got to get credit. They dominated them. And then they go into Miami, severely shorthanded, without 3 starters, Claxton, Cam Johnson, Spencer Dinwiddie, all out. Dennis Smith Jr., also a bench guy who's been playing for them, also out. And they're playing, some deep guys on their bench. Armani Brooks, a two-way, comes in, puts up 17 points on 5 of 6 shooting from 3. Trendon Watford goes 11, 4 and 4, 4 of 6 from the field. The Nets, Cam Thomas, Mikal Bridges, their top 2 guys, struggled for the majority of this game. Ben Simmons didn't have a great game by any stretch, and they're still able to come back, overcome a 12-point deficit heading into the fourth quarter and come away with the win. So I think the story really is that the Nets are playing high-level basketball for the most part here, and there's a very realistic world where they could be 4-0 right now.
It's got to be nice to not have all of the associated drama of the last couple years and just playing good basketball. Like, that's the story. That's what's going on right now with Brooklyn, and we'll see what happens on this back-to-back and then figure out how to kind of go from there. But between Cam Thomas stepping up and doing some crazy things in his role and Ben Simmons, let's go with that one, actually. The Ben Simmons experience so far, it's got to be more or less how you expected it, how we talked about it at the beginning of the year. Is it better than expected or worse than expected in your mind?
I'd say it's somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't say it's better than expected. I wouldn't say that he's played, terrible by any stretch. I think that it's been up and down, and I think the really interesting development about this, which is something that I've talked about, is that his 2 best performances came against Dallas and against Charlotte. Had some struggles last night in Miami, but his best performances, it's a tiny sample size, obviously, so we're going to have to wait for more games, but it's come after Nick Claxton went down, and the conversation heading into the season was how do Claxton and how do Simmons coexist as non-shooters in the Nets starting 5 and 2 guys who are going to garner heavy minutes in the rotation. And Claxton goes down, and Ben Simmons is kind of playing this 5-out point center role. I was talking to Erik Spoelstra before the game yesterday, and he was talking about the space that Ben has been able to create for the Nets, the pace that they're playing at. They're playing at the 8th highest pace in the league right now, and how a guy like Cam Thomas has been able to take advantage of that space and get to his spots. And Ben's really always been at his best when he's been playing in this 5-out. That's why you saw Philadelphia, kind of try to convert Joel Embiid, get him to shoot more threes and be able to space out in the perimeter, just because it's logical. If you have a guy like Ben who's not a shooter and you want him to be able to attack the paint, you don't want a guy in there. So him playing this 5-out, being surrounded by shooters, being able to push the ball, try to get to the basket a little bit, which he needs to do more, 100%, but being able to spray out the shooters is when he's looked best. So I think that Ben, the first game wasn't great, but, he's played high-level defense the whole time, played great defense in the fourth quarter last night. He's at 10 rebounds a game. He's at around 8 assists per game. He's in the top 20 in the league in both of those categories. He definitely needs to attack the basket more, and I think there were some glaring points last night, especially in the fourth quarter, where he didn't look very assertive, and he looked pretty quick to get the ball out of his hands. So that's something that's going to be, something to monitor, and definitely is a little bit of a concern in fourth quarters of games, especially once Claxton comes back. How are you going to have those 2 guys on the floor if Ben doesn't really want to look for his shot? How are they going to coexist? You look to bring one of those guys off the bench. If so, who is it? So the way that I would pretty much summarize Ben Simmons' performance right now is he's doing certain things at a high level for sure. He's rebounding the ball. He's getting his assist numbers, could be a little bit more aggressive going to the basket, but he's playing great defense. And he's really been able to keep the Nets afloat in these games without Nick Claxton from a rebounding and defensive standpoint using his size and versatility.
Should be fascinating to track throughout the year. And I do agree that the Claxton-Simmons dynamic is going to be something to watch, because Claxton is somebody that you'd like to have around and you'd like to continue to build around as well. So having two guys that are sort of juxtaposed in their styles and their abilities to kind of coexist should be fascinating as well. But hey, I mean, in theory, with the shooting that this team has with Cam Thomas and Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and even Dorian Finney-Smith and guys like that, like I remember watching this team last year and watching them go 5 out against Nikola Jokic and winning a game, stealing a game in Denver because of that ability to space. And if you have Ben Simmons basically playing in the middle of all that spacing, then in theory it should be pretty good to be able to match up like that. So yeah. I'm curious to see how it plays out.
Interesting that you just brought that up, because Jock Vaughn was talking about the Nets and what they've looked like with Simmons and this 5-out going small and just talking about different things. He was talking specifically about Dorian Finney-Smith, who's having a great start to the season and what he's been able to do. Kind of, he's calling Dorian the small ball 5. Really, it's kind of Ben is kind of the point center. So it's interesting, with Ben Simmons in the rotation, describing what positions people are playing in articles, especially when you're writing it out, it's always an adventure. But he was talking about that, and what he was saying is, I've never been scared to go 5 out. I played 5 out, played small a lot last year. He actually brought it up and said, we played small and won a game against Nikola Jokic, the best big in the league and the MVP, and said so. He said pretty much, I will never have any fear or shy away from doing that because of a matchup. So I took that as, I've always thought that he was eventually, Jock this year was going to go more towards staggering Ben and Nick, because he went just after 2 games last season, he went away from that look, because it really is difficult offensively in the half court. You have to be playing defense at such a high level. You have to be so committed to pushing the ball in transition to field even an average offense with those 2 non-shooters. So I think eventually he will go to that. And I think that this team's success in this small sample size, but especially Ben's success, especially in those Dallas and Charlotte games, I think speaks to what you could see later on. And once we get to that point, the real question in my eyes is Ben and Nick Claxton, who is going to be closing games in those situations?
I do rotation charts for Denver, and I like to post those, and I think people have some general value with them. It would be so fascinating to do the Nets rotation chart, because they would have so many different combinations that you can go to, and you're always
a lot of guys playing too. The Nets are legit 14, 15 deep. There's been injuries, so guys have been forced in, but they have guys who can play. I mean, Lonnie Walker is a guy I've been talking about. He's around 17 points per game. He's shooting, I don't know, 47% from 3. I'm pretty sure he has a plus 24 net rating swing. It's the highest on the team. I tweeted that out. So you got him coming off the bench, and you have, like I said, Armani Brooks and Trendon Watford. The Nets scored 50 bench points last night. Their bench guys were the best guys on the floor for most of the game, and they really allowed them to steal a win. So they're deep. Ben, Nick offer a lot of rotation versatility. Even a guy like Trendon Watford, 6'8", can handle the ball, is playing point guard last night. They've got a lot going on there. So those rotation charts they'd be a headache to say the least.
That sounds about right. All right. Well, so one more thing before we head to in-season tournament talk. The Nick Claxton injury, how serious is that? Is this something that Nets fans should be concerned about?
Pretty much. It was kind of a strange injury. What we saw was Nick got his feet tangled with Damian Jones against Cleveland in the season opener. Went down, he was running down the floor, got his feet tangled, went down, finished the rest of the game. Definitely looked a little bit like he was laboring. And then Jock, after the game, didn't say there was an injury, just said, working his way into shape, whatever, things along those lines. Then he's out. Since then, he's out tomorrow, Friday at Chicago. So, it's definitely not good to see somebody, obviously a starter, go down with an ankle injury, and he's going to be missing his 4th game now. We'll see what the status report is ahead of that Saturday matchup with Boston, but I wouldn't say it's anything the Nets should be concerned about long-term. Nick was in a walking boot, I think first 2 days after the injury, but that was just precautionary. We saw the Nets do the same thing with Dennis Smith Jr. in the preseason, and then he came back and played in the opener first 3 games and looked fine until going down again with a hip injury, separate thing. So I wouldn't be worried. I think it's just one of those things early in the year. Guys get ankles. Spencer Dinwiddie's dealing with the same thing. I think the guy that's a little bit more interesting, from an injury standpoint, is Cam Johnson, who had what they called a calf contusion, a calf bruise. Then they got an MRI. They said it was a calf strain. Now he's out for 10 days. So we'll see what that comes to be. This is in his left leg, same leg. He had a hamstring injury and missed all of training camp. Jock Vaughn said that the two things are unrelated, but definitely something to monitor moving forward.
That's ambiguous. That's never a great sign when it comes to what an injury means for a team, what an injury means for a player. So hopefully that's a whole lot of nothing, and we can not even talk about it by the time we talk next year. All right, so let's talk in-season tournament. Give me a take on the in-season tournament. The Nets are in a group with Chicago, Boston, Orlando, Toronto. Are you excited for this thing?
I am. I mean, maybe not to the level that some people are in the NBA, the way they're talking about it, but I understand it. You're trying to create more intrigue, more interest in the regular season. I get it. And I think sometimes people forget in the NBA that, not all these guys are making $20, $30 million a year, and there's money on the line here. And, I'm sure not everybody's familiar with the exact numbers. I kind of loosely remember, but if you win, I mean, it's real money coming to these guys, especially there's guys in rotations that are on minimum contracts that are going to be playing for this. The guys at the end of the bench, maybe they won't be in, but they're certainly going to be rooting hard for their guys in these ones. Oh. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm interested to see how it goes. I think that it's a nice little wrinkle, to add into the regular season. The courts, I think, everybody's talking about those. The Nets are going to be playing tomorrow on a bright red court. Nearly the entire court's red. So I might have some Bulls players lying down on the floor in camouflage. And I saw somebody tweet out that they were like, the NBA wanted to add more intrigue to the regular season, and now they have every franchise playing on Boise State's football field or something like that. So, it'll be fun. The Nets have next Friday, they have a nationally televised game in Boston as their second in-season tournament game. Somebody going to cover that, and to see that how they match up with this revamped Celtics squad, who everybody considers a top 2-3 team in the league. It'll be really fun. So I definitely think that there will be some intrigue, and I'm expecting a little bit of a heightened intensity from the guys.
We will see what happens. He is Erik Slater of Clutch Points covering the Brooklyn Nets. Erik, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it, and hopefully this goes well, and we can talk to each other in 6 weeks.
Sounds good. Maybe we'll be coming back with a Brooklyn Nets in-season tournament championship. So we'll see.
I love it. Have a good one.
All right, see you, man.
All right, that is going to do it for this episode of The Alley-Oop. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you've enjoyed the content, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Really excited to hear about what you guys have to say about this one. This was a fun one to record, and I think that these Friday episodes are going to be extremely, extremely fun. So looking forward to this. Thank you so much to my Atlantic Division correspondents. They were awesome on this episode. Next week, I've got a guest lined up for the Tuesday episode. And then on Friday, we've got the Southwest Division, which features Victor Wembanyama, who's been doing some crazy things. Looking forward to all of the coverage. Looking forward to all these check-ins. Again, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to rate, review. Be tremendous. Thank you so much. Hope you guys have a great weekend.